Alhamdulillah. Many people struggle to memorize the Quran because they haven't chosen the right memorization method which suits them best. Most people use a method that is either too simple so it holds them back, or a method that is too complicated so it overwhelms them. So today we're going to discuss three different Hifdh methods and which one is best for you according to your level of memorization. Before we get into the methods, let's talk about how memorization works in general. So memorization is all about repetition. The more you repeat, the stronger your hifz will be. So all of the following methods will be based on repeating as many times as possible. And I'll be basing the methods on the 15-liner Madani Mus'haf. So the first method is the beginner method. It's very good if you're new to memorizing or if you struggle with memorization in general. So first off, you want to divide the page into three portions, which is 5 lines per portion. Now you want to read the first ayah 10 times and then the second ayah 10 times, and then read both the first and the second ayah together 10 times, and then repeat this process for the third, fourth, and fifth ayah until you reach the end of the first portion. Now read the entire portion 5 times without looking to test yourself, and then repeat this same process for the second part of the page and the third part of the page. So this method is mainly about memorizing one ayah at a time and connecting them together. And this is one of the most basic Hifz methods that many people use around the world, and it is what I started with when I was first memorizing. And one of the benefits of this technique is that it is really good in terms of memorizing the words of the ayah and the order of the ayat. But it is time consuming, especially if you're going to be repeating each ayah 10 times and also repeating the ayahs 10 times together to memorize the order. So it's not fully practical for more advanced Hufadh who are already used to memorizing and want to memorize multiple pages daily. And that brings me to the next method, which is more fast paced for those of you who are intermediary in their hifz. So the steps are as follows. You want to once again divide the page into three parts, which is 5 lines per portion. Then you want to read the first portion in its entirety 20 times, 15 times whilst looking at the Mus'haf, and 5 times without looking. And then you want to repeat the same process for the other two parts of the page. This method is designed to help you to memorize faster without having to repeat the ayahs many times and connecting them. This method especially works well if you're already familiar with the page by listening to it many times beforehand. And I also started using this method when I memorized around 8 juz. But the only main downside to this method is that the order of the ayat will feel a little bit weak. So that's why before doing this method, you have to make sure that you're familiar with the page or you're familiar with the Quran in general. And from my experience, memorizing the order of the ayat and recalling them in review is much more difficult than memorizing the words itself. Because understanding why an ayah comes after another is very difficult if you don't understand Arabic. And even if you do understand Arabic, it is still difficult to fully understand at first sight as to why one passage comes after another. In fact, a person must have in-depth knowledge of tafsir to really understand the order of the Quran. But to be honest, even if you were to do the first method throughout your hifz journey, once you finish your hifz and you're only doing review, regardless of whether you chose to do the first method or the second method, you will still struggle almost the exact same way in terms of retaining the order of the ayat. And that's just how it is for everyone who memorizes the Quran. The order of the ayat is always the hardest to retain. Now moving on to the third method, this is very similar to the second method, but it's best for those who are very used to memorizing and have maybe memorized around 15 juz. So the steps are as follows. Divide the page into two parts, which is 7.5 lines per part. Read the first part 30 times in total, 20 times whilst looking at the Mus'haf and 10 times without looking. And then repeat the same process for the second part of the page. And like I mentioned about the second method, this third method is also perfect if you want to memorize multiple pages a day. But once again, it is definitely not suitable for beginners because you have to be very familiar with the Quran and the skill of memorizing in order for this to benefit you. And I also started using this method when I memorized 15 juz of the Quran. However, for some pages, I would actually use the second method because of the difficulty of those pages itself. And for easier pages, I would use the third method. So now that you're aware of three different hifz methods, you have to decide which one suits you best, and that will be based on two factors. Number one, how much juz have you memorized? And number two, which method are you most comfortable with? So until you have memorized 5 juz, you should stick to the first method. And once you have memorized 10 juz, you can move on to the second method. And finally, if you have memorized anything more than 10 juz, you can implement the third method. On top of that, you should choose a method that works best for you, even if it's the beginner method, which is the slowest one. As long as you're memorizing, it doesn't matter which one you actually choose, and you can even switch between them depending on the difficulty of the page. So, for example, if you're finding a page really hard to memorize, you can use the first method. And for pages that are relatively simple, you can use the second method. And for pages that you find really easy, you can use the third method. If you benefited from this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and share with others. And comment below any questions you have about Hifdh or about this video in general. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.